All right, YouTube. I'm worried that Jeff Sessions is living in the same era that John McLean might be living in, because now he's comparing marijuana to heroin and saying, "Oh, it's only slightly less awful than heroin is." You couldn't be more wrong. There are plenty of people that smoke marijuana and are not even habituated to it. I was one of these people half a decade ago. I smoked it myself. And at the time, I think it was still illegal to do so in Vermont, thankfully, of course. Nobody cares anymore. It's been decriminalized. So retroactively, like what I did now would be legal. Like if I had gotten in trouble for it, it'd actually get cleared from my record now. But yeah, I did use some marijuana and some other psychedelics years and years ago. And marijuana is pretty weak, honestly. That includes the high grade, 20 a gram sort of special hydro that your friend got from some true hippie living in the Green Mountains or something. It's not particularly powerful. It's not very physically addicting, very slightly. It's more habituating than it is physically addicting, and of course, in that sense, it would be no different from the secondary addiction potential of tobacco or something like that. And it's much easier to quit that than tobacco. For many people, alcohol. If the argument is that marijuana is harmful, well, again, so is alcohol, certainly tobacco, and those are both legal and regulated for adults to use. If the idea is that it will cause problems, like it would, screw you up in some way, that you're unable to work, you're unable to deal with others, your social contract is in violation because you're not doing the right thing, your behavior breaks down, well, that could be said about alcohol as well, certainly. There are people who find it very difficult to maintain a normal life because they're too busy sucking the beers down, so to speak. In that sense, I'm not sure what the legal differentiation would be. The scheduling system that the DEA uses is totally wrong. It is utterly, completely fabricated. It's not based on science. It's totally arbitrary. Any legitimate medical professional will tell you the same thing, and have for years now. Marijuana is not a dangerous substance. It can be an illegal substance, but that doesn't make it dangerous. The government's opinion means absolutely nothing on this token anymore, because it's so clear that they're so totally wrong. For anybody who's ever tried marijuana, they would understand what I'm talking about. It's not particularly long-lived. It's not particularly powerful. You'd have to smoke a very large amount of it to get significant effects. But then again, you could also take 10 cigarettes, shove them in your mouth, light them with a blowtorch, huff them down. Yeah, you'd get high. Yeah, you'd be feeling a little weird. You can do the same thing with caffeine. One time I had 3 energy drinks in the same half-hour period. I was sitting there shaking and twitching and felt like my mind was going 1,000 miles per hour. But it's perfectly legal to do so. I think it was I had, if I remember correctly, a Rockstar, a Red Bull, and a sugar-free NOS in that same period. So I was riding high off that caffeine buzz. It was actually pretty fun until I crashed a couple hours later. That wasn't so entertaining. But it got me through my work shift at the time, back in UVM. This was the same time period I was using like LSD and marijuana and stuff. Honestly, that was stronger than marijuana would ever be. I was like, whoa, it's crazy. But Jeff Sessions is totally wrong. Marijuana has now been legalized in a slew of states. I don't hear many tales of people going totally apeshit on it. I happen to be one of those that believes that it should probably just be decriminalized rather than outright legalized. That is, that at the most you're getting a slap on the wrist. I would continue enforcing things like DUI. People shouldn't be huffing on their bong and then getting behind the wheel of a car. That's a bad idea. I've been around people who have smoked marijuana and driven before. They seem to drive perfectly fine. It's certainly less of an effect than alcohol, but still, I mean, it's too much of a liability. And then they do green out when they're driving. They do crash. We don't really need that. I think public intoxication, yeah, that could still apply. If somebody's taken a couple hits and they're walking around, I don't really care. But if someone's higher than Harlem, they're wandering around just chuckling to themselves and they're like wavering all around like, ooh, look at the colors. Yeah, that could be a problem. That wouldn't be necessarily the greatest thing, I think, for society. But to say that marijuana has any similarity at all to heroin is so totally and abjectly wrong in every scientific manner possible that it makes me wonder if Jeff Sessions is taking his job seriously. It makes me wonder if maybe he's not high on something else when he makes statements like this. Is he riding high off of vodka? because supposedly they're all Russian agents, so I assume he drinks vodka instead of like whiskey or gin or something. Is he drunk when he makes these comments? Because he's clearly wrong. All he has to do is talk to a handful of medical professionals or biologists, and they'll tell him that this is totally wrong. Heroin destroys lives. And it doesn't destroy lives solely because it's illegal and because drug war and they get a felony charge, can't get a job, their relationship is broken up, their social fabric, is unraveled around them, and then they become sort of displaced, and then they're given over to other criminal behaviors. No, that's the case with marijuana. What happens there is that most of the time it's destroying somebody's life. They've been caught with it or caught on it, and they go to prison. They get out of prison, they can't get a good job. They get ostracized by some of their friends or family. People look down upon them. They think that they're going to flip out randomly because, they use drugs or something like that. And that's just not the way that it works, but that's the effect that marijuana has because of the drug war. With heroin, it's totally different. It's more like crack or meth or something like that. When a person is totally addicted to heroin, their life can literally spiral out of control. You've got the risk, of course, of overdosing, which you don't really have with marijuana. If you want to buy $10,000 worth of the top-grade hydro and vape it in one sitting, yeah, you could maybe kill yourself. It's going to be rather difficult to do that with easily obtained amounts. How many people do you know that are willing to drop hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get enough marijuana to get truly blasted out of their mind in the first place? Not many of them. Most of these people live normal lives. It's just like drinkers. We look at alcoholics. We look at the number of people who can't go without alcohol for more than a few hours, who sometimes drink and drive, who stagger around looking like a homeless bum, vomiting all over themselves. They're binge drinkers and stuff, college kids or whatever. We look at that, and we see that as the face of alcohol. And we do the same for marijuana. We look at a handful of true neat hippies that they don't have a job and just sit in their basement and get high all day, without regarding tens of millions of fairly regular marijuana users who you probably wouldn't, unless you asked them and they told the truth, say, yeah, I smoke weed sometimes. You wouldn't even know that they ever smoked it. They have a regular job. Sometimes some of these people are wealthy. Look at, who is it, like Phelps there, I think, the Olympian swimmer. He wins all sorts of awards, and he's like, yeah, I smoke weed every day. Even though you look at celebrities and singers and stuff like that, some of these people smoke marijuana, and they don't really seem to have a problem with it. Their mental faculties aren't all fucked up. You're going to get fucked up if you drank as often as some people smoked marijuana. Probably the drinker would be at much greater hazard for having mental difficulties than the smoker of marijuana. Now, does that mean that it's totally safe? No, I'm not saying that. It is capable of being habituating. It is very mildly physically addictive. It is capable of becoming a habit that someone's spending, money that they really shouldn't be spending on such a thing for it. But then again, that's the same with alcohol and tobacco. We don't haul people into prison and ostracize them for spending too much money on cigarettes, for spending too much money on beer. Okay, maybe the latter sometimes if they're truly totally far gone into alcoholism and get them into rehab. But that's just the thing. We offer services to these people who are addicted to tobacco or alcohol so that they can get help, so that they can stop being addicted to it. And so as a result, usage of both of these substances is in decline. Usage of marijuana is never going to decline because it continues to be illegal. We don't really give people rehab. Not that you really necessarily even need it for marijuana. It's just not addictive enough to really justify that. Essentially, you just say, okay, well, you need to give up the weed because you're smoking all your money away. And most people aren't going to have a problem at least cutting back on their marijuana usage. Yeah, some people, they'll have more of a problem than others. I didn't go through any withdrawal. When I stopped doing drugs, I was like, I'm not a drug user anymore. Okay, it was as easy as that. I didn't want to use it anymore. After my spice overdose, marijuana just made me paranoid anyway. So I'm like, why would I bother to smoke it? It's a waste of time and money. I'd rather drink large amounts of caffeine or have a beer or something like that. And it's just fine. But no, marijuana isn't even remotely similar to heroin. You've obviously never smoked marijuana if you think that that's the case. Heroin rips people's lives apart because they spiral out of control into addiction and they end up just sitting there worshiping their toilet or something like that. They're totally strung out. They're barely able to move. Overdoses are fairly frequent among those that are heavy into heroin use. How many times have you heard a person overdosed on, low-grade street pot, and ended up having to get taken to the ER. Your friend that never smoked it before and has a couple of bowls might think that they're too high and get really paranoid and green out, but they're not actually in any physical danger as long as they've got somebody there who can tell them, yeah, of course you're greening out. You smoke too much. Now just wait an hour and eat these Twinkies or something and you'll be fine. Then you distract them, you put on a TV program that's really funny, and pretty soon they're just giggling. That's what happens with marijuana. Can it be a waste of time? Yes. Can it be a waste of money? Of course. So is alcohol. I drink sometimes. I've cut way down on that as well. But yeah, it is kind of a waste of money. You do have to admit that. But nobody's going to throw me in jail for having a glass of wine or a can of beer. But if you get caught in most parts of this country still with a joint, and you've chosen to use that as your main waste of money to alter your way of life, to alter the way your mind thinks, then you can get dragged off to jail. And then all of a sudden, somehow you lose your Second Amendment rights, which is totally retarded and unconstitutional. In many states, you lose your right to vote. You can get ostracized by businesses you might want to get hired by. You can potentially get, the cops breathing down your neck for really nothing. Ultimately, it's nothing. We've had presidents who have smoked marijuana. It's not just Obama, by the way. Others have used that too. Probably had presidents that snorted cocaine in the Oval Office. Shot up heroin. Who knows? Some of them were certainly addicted to some laudanum or other painkillers back in the 1800s. I'm sure Ulysses S. Grant probably loved his dope, and it was illegal at the time when he was using it. No wonder he was a failed president. There's no comparison between marijuana and heroin whatsoever. I've never used heroin. I knew enough to stay away from the heroins and the cracks and the meths of the world, and amphetamines and all these other things. I knew better than to mess with those things because even people who used drugs before I did said to stay away from them because, yeah, it's not just a joke. They really are that addictive, and you can destroy your life. Now, I've heard from people who have said, oh yeah, I smoke meth once in a while, but I don't do it regularly, like I'm not addicted. Maybe so, but maybe a year from now you are heavily addicted. Maybe you have a really rough week, go on a meth binge, and then you can't stop. That's mainly the problem. The habituation overlaps with the physical addictive qualities. With marijuana, though, both of those potentials for addiction are so significantly lower, especially on the physical side, that it generally doesn't happen. The person is still psychologically able to function without their marijuana, but a heroin addict is going to find it extremely difficult to function without heroin. In fact, it's going to knock them out of commission when they start withdrawing. For some weeks, they will be out of commission. That's a no-brainer. It will happen if they've been addicted to any significant degree at all. That's true. Whether or not they're even capable of doing that outside of a rehab facility is often up to question. But with a marijuana user, you don't need to throw them in rehab. You don't need to throw them in jail either. Just smoking marijuana. I'm sorry, I just don't see it as a moral ill. Some of these things that other people in the new right see as, oh, we need to keep enforcing this. I'm like, really? We do? I would disagree with that. I think it's too expensive to enforce, for one thing. That's the main problem. Even if you think it's a moral ill, you're spending through the nose to put potheads in prison. You're spending hundreds of dollars a year of your taxes, potentially, in some states especially, are going towards throwing these people in very expensive prisons, often private prisons. And their lives are being ruined, and then they get out and they can't really add to the economy because they're being ostracized by everyone they want to work for. That, I would think, is the main problem. It's not just affecting the drug user, it's affecting you too. This even goes for hard drug actual addicts. Their lives are being destroyed. We don't need to, if you want them not to relapse into using drugs because stress is the main reason often that they're using drugs, then I would think that once they get out, you wouldn't want them to be blackballed from 99% of workplaces. You wouldn't want their social ties to be completely unraveled. You would want them to be continued in acceptance by those around them so that they can get the job, so they can make ends meet, so they have a social circle, so that if they feel tempted to relapse into using heroin, meth, crack, whatever it is, there are people there that can prevent them from doing so. They can talk them down from that cliff, so to speak. Right now we have a system which really doesn't provide that from people. thus addiction continues. It's just like prohibition. Alcoholics under prohibition, essentially, unless their community was hush-hush about it and just tolerated the town drunk and let them drink, and drink themselves to death and go blind for moonshine or something, there was no real structure available for people to get them over their withdrawal, to get them dry and clean, because they were seen as a common criminal that had some systemic mental problem with them. It was seen as a mental ill, a mental problem. And so there was no attempt really to cure them of their addiction because they didn't even understand fully how it worked. We now know much more about how it operates. We can tackle the problem, but not if we continue comparing marijuana with heroin. That's stupid. Jeff Sessions is a moron if he actually thinks that this is true. He is wrong. According to every established bit of scientific literature from the modern period, he's totally wrong. According to anecdotal accounts from millions of people, he's wrong. According to me, someone who used marijuana in the past, he's totally wrong. I'm obviously still capable of functioning mentally. I'm still capable of functioning physically, despite, for several years, being a fairly regular marijuana smoker. I also managed to stop using marijuana on my own. No rehab, no withdrawal symptoms, nothing like heroin. No similarity whatsoever, other than the fact that they're both considered equally illegal under the retardation of the drug war. That's about all. Peace out.